The sun had just begun its slow descent when John stepped onto the porch, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag. The scent of freshly mowed grass lingered in the air, and the quiet hum of suburban peace filled the late afternoon. It was the kind of neighborhood where people knew each other's dogs better than their names, and not much ever changed. Until today. Across the street, a large white moving truck stood like a strange visitor among the familiar driveways and trimmed hedges. Boxes were being unloaded, but there was no crew, no chaos, just one woman, tall and graceful, carrying things in and out alone. She wore simple jeans and a light blouse, her hair pulled into a neat bun, and her movements were deliberate and focused. John's mother watched her from the living room window, arms crossed, curiosity blooming on her face. "She's doing it all by herself," she muttered. "That poor woman. John, go help her." John looked up from his phone. "Help who?" "The new neighbor. She just moved in, alone. Go see if she needs a hand with the boxes." He hesitated. Maybe she's fine." "She's not fine, John. She's lifting a microwave by herself. Now go." With a half smile and a quiet sigh, John slipped on his shoes and headed across the street. As he got closer, he noticed the way she paused after each trip. Brief moments of rest that looked like someone pretending not to be tired. "Hey there," John said, offering a friendly nod. "Need a hand?" She turned toward him, startled, then managed a polite smile. "Oh, hi. I guess I could use a little help. Name's John. I live just over there," he said, pointing to the brick house across the street. "Emma," she replied, shifting a box against her hip. "Appreciate it." He took the box from her hands and followed her inside. The house smelled like cardboard and new beginnings. Furniture still wrapped in plastic stood like statues in the living room, and open boxes were scattered on the floor, each one labeled in black marker: kitchen, books, bedroom. They worked in silence at first. John moved with ease, lifting and setting things down with a quiet efficiency, occasionally asking where something should go. Emma, still reserved, gave short but polite answers. She watched him with a kind of quiet curiosity, surprised by how quickly he seemed to understand what needed to be done. After about 20 minutes, she finally spoke again. "You're good at this." John chuckled. "Grew up doing it for my mom. She rearranged furniture like it was a hobby." Emma smiled, faintly. Lucky her. The silence between them softened a bit after that. By the time the truck was empty, the living room looked like a place someone might actually live in. Emma stood at the center of it, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks, John," she said. "Seriously, I didn't expect anyone to help." John shrugged. "We're neighbors now. Gotta look out for each other." For the first time, her smile reached her eyes. The following day, John found himself back at Emma's doorstep, toolbox in hand. He hadn't expected to return so soon, but when his mother casually mentioned that Emma might still need help settling in, he didn't protest. Something about her, quiet, composed, and carrying a weight she didn't speak of, stayed with him. Emma opened the door with a surprised look, but not an unwelcome one. "Oh, "Hi, John," she said, brushing her palms on her jeans. "Back for more?" He grinned. "Thought I'd offer a few finishing touches. Some lights aren't working, and I noticed you didn't get around to the curtains." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Sure, I could use the help." Inside, the house looked a little less like a storage unit and more like a home. But wires still hung loose from a light fixture, and half the furniture was still unassembled. John got to work with quiet confidence. He replaced a broken switch, tightened a few fittings, and even convinced a stubborn floor lamp to stand straight. Emma watched from the dining room table, occasionally handing him screws or asking if he needed anything. She wasn't used to people doing things for her, not without expecting something in return. But John never asked questions or made her feel awkward. He just moved around the house like he belonged there. "So," she said, "after a while your mom said you work with your hands. Is this what you do full-time?" "Not exactly," he replied, screwing in a new bulb. "I do some contract work, wiring, repairs, odd jobs. Pays the bills, keeps me moving." She nodded. "Useful skill. I used to think I could handle things on my own, but this place is proving me wrong." He glanced over with a smile. "You're doing fine. Most people wouldn't move across town alone and still be standing." Emma laughed lightly, a warm, genuine sound that surprised even her. "You say that like I had a choice." "You didn't?" She paused. "Let's just say life gave me a push." They fell into a comfortable rhythm after that, John adjusting curtain rods while Emma unpacked books, both occasionally sharing bits of themselves between the clatter of tools and the rip of tape. She told him she used to write for magazines back when deadlines didn't feel like quicksand. He told her about growing up with a mother who fixed everything with her hands and her voice. By the time the last curtain was hung and the final screw tightened, a soft orange glow filtered through the windows. The place felt warmer somehow, less new, more lived in. Emma looked around, then at John. "You've done more in 2 hours than I managed in 2 days." John shrugged modestly. "Just glad I could help." She hesitated for a second, then smiled. Not the polite one, but something real. "Can I offer you some tea?" He smiled back. "I'd like that." They sat across from each other at a small round table near the window, mismatched mugs in hand. The tea was a little too strong, slightly bitter, but neither of them minded. Outside, the sky was turning dusky blue, and the street had quieted to a gentle hum. Emma cupped her mug with both hands. "I forgot how much work moving is," she said with a tired smile. "But it's good. It feels good to start over." John tilted his head slightly. "New town, new house, big change. If you don't mind me asking, what brought you here?" She hesitated, the question lingering in the air longer than either expected. Then she took a breath. "I was living in the city. Had a place, a partner, a fast-paced job that looked great on paper. I worked in publishing, managing deadlines, wrangling writers, babysitting editors." She gave a small laugh, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Then one day I realized I was just tired. Of the noise, of the pressure, of pretending things were okay. John nodded, listening carefully. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush her. We were together for 8 years, she added softly. But we weren't moving forward, just coasting. When I finally said I was leaving, I think he was more relieved than I was. There was a silence, but not a heavy one. John stirred his tea and looked at her with quiet understanding. I guess it takes guts to walk away, he said. Not a lot of people can. Emma shrugged. It didn't feel brave. It felt like drowning and finally swimming up for air. John nodded again. Well, I'm glad you swam this way. That made her smile. He took a sip, then said, My story's not that exciting. I do small jobs, wiring, home repairs, odd stuff, nothing fancy. I like being useful, you know? Knowing I helped someone sleep better or flip a switch and the light comes on. That sounds like a good life, she said sincerely. Honest work. Yeah. My mom raised me on that idea. Said being kind and handy can get you through most things. They talked more than either of them expected. About the neighborhood, quiet, old-fashioned, full of nosy kindness, about books and movies, about the best time to plant tomatoes. The age gap between them faded with each passing minute, replaced by a natural ease that surprised them both. John found himself watching her when she spoke, how her expression softened when she talked about old bookstores, how her eyes brightened at the mention of gardening. She was different. Not just older, but deeper, like someone who'd already lived several lives and come out quietly strong. When he finally stood to leave, the sky was dark and the air carried a cool breeze. Thanks for the tea, he said, stepping out onto the porch. Emma nodded. Thanks for everything, John. As he crossed the street, hands in his pockets, John couldn't help but smile to himself. He was definitely thinking about her. Over the next few weeks it became a quiet routine. Emma would text or wave from across the street, and John would show up with a toolbox or a shovel, depending on the task. At first it was small things, tightening a leaky faucet, assembling a stubborn bookshelf, fixing a glitchy Wi-Fi connection. But then came the garden. Do you know anything about flower beds? Emma had asked one morning, stepping out in her worn sneakers, a wide-brimmed hat in her hand. Enough to fake it, John replied with a grin. Show me what we're working with. They spent hours digging through stubborn roots and soil, choosing spots for roses and lavender, arguing playfully over whether a tomato plant belonged in the front yard. The work was grounding, but it was the easy rhythm of their conversations that John found himself drawn to. She had a dry wit, a thoughtful way of speaking, and she always listened like what he said mattered. He started finding reasons to drop by even when she hadn't asked, returning a borrowed wrench, offering leftover cookies from his mom, or claiming he needed to check on a light fixture again. Emma never turned him away. She would give him a small smile, sometimes raise an eyebrow at his obvious excuses, but she never said no. Still, there was a quiet line she didn't cross. Her laughter, while genuine, was measured. Her eyes, warm as they were, carried a kind of guardedness, like she was keeping part of herself just out of reach. John noticed it but didn't push. He liked being around her. That was enough, for now. It wasn't long before the neighborhood began to notice. Mrs. Peterson, who walked her dog twice a day, started giving John knowing looks when he crossed the street. The Thompsons, who lived on the corner, casually mentioned seeing him helping the new lady again. And one evening at the grocery store, a clerk his age leaned in and smirked. "So, you and the older woman, huh?" John just rolled his eyes. "She's a neighbor. That's it." Back home, he brought it up with his mom while drying dishes. "They're just bored," she said without missing a beat. "You're doing something kind for someone who needs it. Let them talk. You don't think it's weird?" She looked at him carefully. "I think kindness doesn't come with an age limit, and Emma seems like a decent woman. If you like spending time there, do it." John nodded, grateful for her simple wisdom. A few days later, after he helped Emma organize her old photo albums, on a new shelf, she sat beside him on the floor and handed him a glass of lemonade. "You've done a lot for me, John," she said quietly. "I probably would have drowned in all this without you." He smiled, brushing dust off his jeans. "Happy to be the life jacket." Emma chuckled, her expression softening. "I'm glad you're around." So was he. More than he could say out loud. The rain came in hard and sudden, hammering against windows and soaking the streets in minutes. Thunder cracked overhead like a warning, and the power snapped off just as Emma was halfway through a chapter in her book. The silence that followed was unsettling, the kind that wrapped around her like a damp blanket. She hesitated for a moment before picking up her phone and dialing the only person she trusted to show up in this kind of weather. "Hey, it's me," she said when John answered. "I think the power's out on my end. Probably the fuse box. Do you mind?" "I'm on my way," he replied without pause. 15 minutes later, John arrived drenched, his jacket sticking to his arms and hair dripping down his forehead. Emma opened the door, holding a towel out for him, her eyebrows raised in apology. "I wasn't expecting a rescue through a monsoon." "Electricity waits for no man," he said with a crooked grin, taking the towel and stepping inside. "Where's the panel?" She led him to the utility closet, and he crouched down, flashlight clenched between his teeth, working the breakers with practiced ease. Outside, the storm raged on, wind howling, lightning flashing against the walls. And then, just as he finished tightening a loose wire, the rain intensified and a tree branch crashed down onto her front porch. Emma jumped at the sound. "Well," John said, standing up, "you're not going outside in that. Looks like I'm stuck here for a while." They moved to the living room, lit only by candles Emma had scattered across shelves. The flickering light made the space feel smaller, more intimate. They sat on the floor, backs against the couch, the storm a steady presence outside. Emma was quiet for a while, then spoke without looking at him. "I used to love storms. They felt exciting, unpredictable. Now they just make me feel unsettled." John turned to her. "Why?" She exhaled slowly. "Because they remind me I'm alone, that if something breaks, or if I slip, or if the world just decides to fall apart, there's no one there to notice. He didn't answer right away, just let the sound of the rain fill the silence. It's strange, she continued. You think, at a certain point, you'll have someone. Not necessarily a husband or a family, just someone. And then you wake up one day, 35, moving into a new house, asking yourself when that stopped being a certainty. John looked at her, the candlelight catching the edge of her expression. Strong, but tired. Honest. You don't have to be alone, said softly. Not if you don't want to be. She looked at him, really looked, as if trying to figure out what he meant, or maybe if he meant more than he said. He didn't try to explain it. He didn't need to. They sat in the soft quiet of flickering light and falling rain, and for once, Emma didn't feel alone. And John? He realized he'd never respected someone more in his life. The morning after the storm, the air was crisp and fresh, and the world felt washed clean. John returned to Emma's house to check on the damage. A few fallen branches, a cracked flower pot, nothing major. She met him at the door with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that lingered a second too long. Everything between them felt slightly different now. Warmer, more intentional. There were still chores to be done, but now they came with soft laughter, shared glances, and the quiet kind of closeness that didn't need words. A few days later, Emma invited him to dinner. No repairs this time, she said lightly. Just food, and maybe a bottle of wine if you're lucky. John tried to act casual, but his heart beat a little faster. He showed up freshly showered, wearing a shirt he usually saved for holidays. The meal was simple. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a slice of apple pie she insisted she'd burned. It was perfect. They ate on the back patio as the sun dipped below the trees. A string of fairy lights cast a soft glow above them. It was peaceful and oddly domestic. Emma laughed more that evening than he'd ever heard before. She teased him gently about his stubborn approach to fixing things and listened intently when he talked about his dream of eventually starting his own handyman business. By the end of the night, when she offered him a second slice of pie and her hand brushed his as he took the plate, something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. John went home with a lot on his mind. He couldn't ignore the way he felt around her anymore. It was more than just admiration, more than gratitude for her kindness or her stories. It was the way she made him feel, respected, seen, comfortable in a way he didn't even know he needed. But not everyone saw it that way. A few days later, while running errands, he overheard 2 neighbors whispering near the community mailbox. Emma's. Always with that young guy. What's his name? John? Bit inappropriate, don't you think? I mean, she's what, 10 years older, and he's always over there. Well, it's her life, but people are definitely talking. John stood frozen, hidden behind a hedge, his face hot with embarrassment. He didn't know why it hit him so hard. Maybe it was the tone, the smugness in their voices. Maybe it was the implication that what he felt, what he was beginning to understand he wanted, was something shameful. That night, he didn't stop by Emma's house. The next day, He made excuses when she texted, and over the following week he slowly began to pull back. He told himself it was for the best, that maybe the neighbors were right, that maybe he'd misread everything. But even as he stayed away, he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd smiled at him across that dinner table, or how, for just a little while, he had felt like he belonged. A week passed, then another. Emma tried to give John space at first, assuming he was busy or preoccupied. But as his visits dwindled to none and his texts turned into brief, polite replies, the silence between them grew too loud to ignore. One late afternoon, she saw him walking past her house, toolbox in hand, heading toward Mr. Randall's place 2 doors down. She stepped out onto her porch before she could talk herself out of it. "Hey," she called softly. John turned, surprised. He hadn't expected to see her outside. "Hey, got a second?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes searching. His face. He hesitated, then nodded, walking toward her slowly like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Emma didn't lead him inside, just sat on the porch steps and patted the space beside her. He joined her, the early evening air warm and quiet around them. "I've been wondering if I did something," she said gently. "You've been different." John stared at the sidewalk, unsure where to start. "You didn't. It's not you." "Then what is it?" He rubbed the back of his neck, struggling for the right words. "It's me. It's this weird mix of feelings I've never had before. I mean, I like being around you, a lot. And that night, the storm, it felt like something changed, at least for me." Emma's eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. I started thinking maybe it was more than just friendship. And then I heard people talking about us, about the age thing, the way they made it sound, like it was wrong, like I was wrong to feel anything. And I didn't know what to do with that. I started doubting everything. Us, me. A long silence passed between them. Then Emma finally spoke, her voice low but clear. "You're not crazy. I felt it too." She gave him a small, wistful smile. "But I didn't want to risk making things uncomfortable. I told myself it was better to keep it simple. Keep it safe. I've been judged before, John, and I'm tired of defending myself for how I choose to live or who I choose to care about." He looked over at her, his eyes filled with something between relief and sadness. "So what do we do?" Emma took a deep breath, her fingers loosely laced in her lap. "We go slow. We keep talking. We don't pretend nothing's there, but we don't rush into something just to prove people wrong either." John nodded, the knot in his chest finally loosening. "I'd like that. Just being honest. No pressure." She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Honesty and friendship. Whatever grows from there, we'll figure it out together." They sat quietly for a while, shoulders close, the setting sun painting gold across the street. And though nothing dramatic was said or done, the air between them felt lighter, truer, like the first step towards something real. Neither of them knew exactly where it would lead, but for the first time they both wanted to find out. Months passed, and the sharp lines that once separated John and Emma's worlds slowly softened into something shared and steady. What had begun with screws and sockets now lived in laughter, small rituals, and a bond neither of them tried to define too rigidly. The neighborhood eventually moved on from its hushed murmurs. People saw Emma at community gatherings, helping with bake sales, exchanging recipes, and smiling at children who waved from their bikes. And John was always somewhere nearby, sometimes hammering together a bench for the town park, sometimes leaning against Emma's fence, sipping lemonade as they talked about the weather like it was poetry. Their latest project was the garden, no longer just hers, but theirs. On weekends they worked side by side, hands dirty with soil, knees tucked into the grass. Emma insisted on wildflowers. John lobbied for sturdy vegetables. They compromised. Lilies on one end, tomatoes on the other, lavender bordering everything like a soft, fragrant guardrail. "Do you think the cucumbers will make it this time?" Emma asked one morning, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her glove. John leaned on his shovel, grinning. "Only if you stop overwatering them like a nervous mother." She threw a glove at him, laughing. From across the street, John's mother watched from her porch and smiled. Her knitting needles paused mid-stitch. It was clear now. What they had wasn't fleeting or confused. It was something gentler, grounded in time, in care, and in the choice to keep showing up. John never pressed for more, and Emma never pulled away. It was a rhythm, a language that belonged only to them. They talked about everything. His dreams of opening his own business, her idea for a memoir she might one day write. They shared quiet Sundays and spontaneous drives to nowhere in particular. There were no labels, no pressure, only the quiet unfolding of two lives, learning how to be near each other. And in that space, something rare grew. One afternoon, after a long morning of planting tulip bulbs, they sat on Emma's porch again. Muddy shoes kicked off and feet stretched toward the fading light. The breeze smelled of earth and late spring, and for a while they just watched the garden, content in the stillness. Emma turned to him with that soft look she'd grown comfortable giving him, the one that came without caution now. "Tea?" she asked, her voice low and familiar, like a page turned in a well-loved book. John glanced at her, his lips curling into an easy smile. "Only if it comes with your stories," she chuckled, standing up and brushing off her jeans. "Always." And as she stepped inside and he followed, the door closing softly behind them, it felt less like an ending and more like the continuation of something quietly beautiful. No dramatic declarations, no fireworks, just the kind of connection that grew like a garden, patiently, deeply, and against all expectation.